Michigan, 2008. The air had already turned crisp when Hailey Brooke Donner, a 19-year-old community college photography student, failed to return home from a solo photo walk. She was quiet, kind, and known around town for her hauntingly beautiful images of forgotten barns and empty roads. That night, her car was found abandoned near a wooded trail. Her camera still sat in the passenger seat, but Hailey was gone. Despite search efforts, the case stagnated. Leads dried up. Her family clung to hope, but answers never came, until a single strand of DNA, 15 years later, cracked the silence wide open. Before we begin, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Hailey Brooke Donner was the kind of girl who moved quietly through the world but left lasting impressions. Born and raised in a sleepy Michigan town, she was the youngest of three and by far the most introspective. Her parents, Ron and Linda, describe her as gentle and imaginative, always more at ease with animals than with people. Her safe space was behind the camera lens. She didn't seek attention. Hailey's world was made of quiet moments. The rustle of wind through fields, the faded red paint in an abandoned barn, the soft eyes of a dog waiting to be adopted. While others filled their weekends with parties or noise, Hailey wandered the edges of town, her camera capturing what most people missed. Forgotten places, forgotten things, details that only someone like her would notice. She studied digital arts at the local community college and worked part-time at a smoothie shop just off Main Street. The regulars knew her smile, soft and polite. On Saturdays, she'd spend hours at the animal rescue, taking photos of the dogs in natural light, crouching low to meet their eyes. Her pictures helped get dozens adopted. That was Hailey, quiet but deeply connected. To her parents, she was dependable. She always texted when she'd be late. Her shoes were always lined up neatly by the door. Her camera battery always charged at night before a shoot. That's what made what happened next so jarring. On the afternoon of October 9th, 2008, Hailey mentioned she planned to head out toward Old Briar Trail. She'd heard there was a broken-down barn just beyond the tree line, one she hadn't photographed before. The leaves were turning and fog was forecast to roll in. Perfect lighting for the kind of atmosphere she loved. She filled a thermos with tea, packed her camera bag, and left a note on the counter, "Out taking photos. Be back before dinner." But dinner came and went. The sky darkened. Her phone, which she always kept close, went unanswered. By 8:30, her parents were worried. By 10 o'clock, they were calling friends. By 11 o'clock, her father grabbed his keys and started driving the back roads she frequented. He found her car around midnight, parked just off the gravel pullout near Old Briar Trail. The doors were locked. Inside, her thermos sat half full in the cup holder. Her camera rested on the passenger seat. Her phone, dead and silent, was under the visor. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading into the woods, no sign of her walking away. Just a car sitting patiently under the glow of a distant streetlight, and a deep, growing sense that something was wrong. What happened to Hailey that evening? And why did no one hear her scream? October 9th, 2008, started like any other Thursday in Hailey Donner's quiet Michigan town. The trees lining Main Street had begun to blush golden red, and the air carried the scent of decaying leaves and chimney smoke. At the smoothie shop, Hailey worked her usual afternoon shift, blending frozen fruit and offering shy smiles to regulars. A co-worker later recalled that she seemed in a good mood, chatty, even playful in her quiet way. She mentioned the fog rolling in and how perfect it would be for photographs. "Makes the light softer," she said, "like a painting." Around 4:30 p.m., she clocked out and left with her usual setup. Her Canon DSLR, a small tripod, and a thermos of peppermint tea. She wore a tan canvas jacket, hiking boots, and carried a woven satchel slung across her chest. The last thing she said to anyone was that she planned to check out an old barn she'd seen just off Old Briar Trail. At 6:15 p.m., she sent a text to her friend, just 10 words. "Fog's rolling in. Barn looks eerie. Might get some cool shots." It was the last message she would ever send. By 9 p.m., the porch light at the Donner house had been on for hours. Hailey's mother began to worry. Her daughter might have been independent, but she wasn't reckless. She always came home by dark, or called if she didn't. By 10:30, the worry had hardened into fear. Linda called Hailey's phone repeatedly, straight to voicemail. By 11 o'clock, Ron Donner was in his truck, driving the perimeter of town, scanning familiar haunts, gravel turnouts, and country trails. Just off Old Briar Trail, under a skeletal canopy of leafless trees, he saw her car, her silver Toyota Corolla, pulled into a gravel turnout where the road dipped into shadow. The interior light was on. The driver's side door was locked. Inside, everything was as she'd left it. Her thermos in the cup holder, her camera bag on the seat, her phone dead on the dashboard. The tripod was missing, probably taken with her, but she wasn't there. Ron called the police just after midnight. Deputies arrived within the hour. They searched the immediate area with flashlights, calling her name. Nothing. No drag marks. No signs of a scuffle. No footprints leading into the woods. Just layers of wet leaves and a growing fog that swallowed everything in silence. By dawn, the search expanded. Helicopters hovered above the tree line. Volunteers in reflective vests walked shoulder to shoulder through thickets and brush. Dogs were brought in. Ponds were dredged. An old grain silo nearby was searched top to bottom. And yet, not a single thread of Hailey's clothing was found. No shoe prints. No blood. No sound were reported by nearby homes. It was as if the fog itself had taken her. The search stretched into weekend, then into the following week. But still nothing. What could cause a girl to vanish without a trace, in her own hometown, on a trail she knew by heart? In the early days, the town of Pine Hollow became a mirror of Hailey's absence. Her disappearance cut to the quiet rhythms of the small Michigan community, leaving behind an ache that clung to everything. People who had never met her suddenly knew her face. Her photography professor organized a candlelight vigil on the town green. Dozens came, holding up her printed photographs like windows into the soul of someone they now felt they had lost. Flyers bearing Hailey's smiling face and the word, "Have you seen her?" were stapled to utility poles, taped to gas station windows, and posted in grocery store entryways. Her best friend, Kelsey, handed out buttons with Hailey's name and photo to students at the college. Local businesses placed collection jars near their registers, raising money for search efforts. The sheriff's department established a task force within days. They launched a hotline that received over 300 calls in the first 2 weeks alone. Some were genuine tips. Most were noise. Sightings of girls who looked just like her in Indiana, Wisconsin, even as far as Tennessee. None of them panned out. Cadaver dogs combed the woods. Drones equipped with thermal imaging flew over dense brush and waterlogged fields. A nearby quarry was searched twice. Nothing. Not a scrap of clothing. Not a shoe. Not even a broken lens or camera strap. Detectives went through her belongings piece by piece. Hailey's laptop revealed no secret messages, no cryptic searches, just folders upon folders of edited photographs, barns drenched in fog, old weathered porches, the occasional self-portrait in a reflection. Her car GPS showed her typical routes. No detours. No visits to unfamiliar locations. Her phone records were equally fruitless. The last outgoing message was the one to her friend about the fog and the eerie barn. After that, silence. Investigators spoke with anyone who had crossed her path. Friends, co-workers, neighbors, past teachers, and even a few high school acquaintances she hadn't spoken to in years. A former boyfriend was interviewed twice. His alibi checked out. A pizza delivery man who'd served her building that night was questioned. He'd never seen her. There were no signs of a struggle, no note, no indication she planned to leave. By month 3, the urgency in press conferences began to dim. The media coverage slowed. Tips became sporadic. And by spring of the following year, the case file was transferred into the cold cases cabinet of the county sheriff's office. But Hailey's family never stopped. Ron Donner, her father, poured himself into building an online archive. He uploaded every image Hailey had taken in the months before her disappearance, hundreds of them, hoping someone might notice something. A car in the background, a reflection, a person standing too far back in the frame. Her photos circulated through online forums and amateur sleuth groups. Theories ranged from the plausible to the absurd. Some believed she'd been taken by someone living in the woods. Others thought she'd uncovered something during one of her photo walks. Nothing ever came of it. By 2013, the landscape of Pine Hollow had changed. The abandoned barns Hailey once wandered were torn down by new landowners. The smoothie shop she worked at closed its doors. Her community college expanded, building new labs and removing the old art wing. The world moved forward, quietly, relentlessly. But in the Donner household, time stood still. Hailey's room remained untouched, her books in order, her camera bag stored neatly in the closet. Her bed was always made, pillows fluffed, a note still pinned to her corkboard read, "Fog makes everything feel like a secret." No one had the heart to take it down. But the question haunted everyone who loved her. Was Hailey still out there somewhere, or had the fog kept it secret forever? In the weeks following Hailey Donner's disappearance, law enforcement chased every lead, some grounded, others less so. One of the earliest came from a 17-year-old high schooler named Caleb Weston. He told investigators he had been driving home from a friend's house the night Hailey vanished when he saw a man standing on the side of Old Briar Trail. It was around 6:30 p.m. The road was cloaked in fog, and visibility was limited. But Caleb was certain about what he saw. A man, tall, possibly mid-30s, wearing a dark jacket and a knit cap, was standing near a collapsed section of fencing, maybe 30 feet off the road. He wasn't walking. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't on a phone. He was just watching. Caleb slowed his car slightly, unnerved by the figure's stillness, but continued on. At the time, he didn't think much of it. It wasn't until next morning, when he heard the news about Hailey's abandoned car on that same road, that he realized the chilling weight of what he may have witnessed. He reported it to the sheriff's office. Deputies canvassed the area. They knocked on doors, spoke with homeowners, searched barns and tool sheds. No one reported seeing a man of that description. There were no matching vehicles, no footprints, no physical evidence. The only surveillance cameras in the area were attached to a lumber supply store 2 miles away. They showed nothing but a fogged-out stretch of empty road. The lead was noted in the file and quietly shelved. 2 years passed. Then in early 2010, another report surfaced, this time from another county. A woman named Denise Ferris called police after a disturbing encounter during a late afternoon walk near an abandoned paper mill. She reported that a man had followed her for several minutes, trying to strike up small talk, asking if she wanted to see something interesting inside the mill. She said he had a scratchy voice, unkempt beard, and worn clothing. When she refused and quickened her pace, he called after her. That's when she ran. She gave a general description to authorities, eerily similar to Caleb's, tall, mid-30s, scruffy, but without a name, vehicle, or location to tie him down. That case, too, faded into the background. Years blurred together. Leads came and went. Some, like this one, never truly left the minds of investigators, just floated in periphery, unresolved and unconnected. Then, in 2023, 15 years after Hailey vanished, technology did what memory and manpower couldn't. As part of a statewide effort to update old DNA records, a parole officer uploaded a decades-old sample from a man named Marcus Lee Grisham into CODIS, the National DNA Database. Grisham had served time for burglary in the late 90s and was back under supervision after a parole violation involving trespassing. The sample sat for a week. Then it pinged. The hit was partial, degraded, fragmented, but strong enough to raise alarms. It matched the hair found in Hailey Donner's car, a hair that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. Stored in an evidence bag for over a decade, it had been dismissed then, too contaminated, too weak to test with early methods. But now, with updated amplification and forensic scanning, it held secrets it had once buried. The name Grisham meant nothing to Hailey's family. It wasn't in the original suspect list. He wasn't from Pine Hollow. He had never worked in town. On paper, their paths never should have crossed. And yet, his DNA had been found in her car. Who was this man? Where had he come from? And why had he been so close to Hailey on the night she disappeared? Most haunting of all, How had he managed to vanish unnoticed for 15 years? The name that emerged from the DNA match, Marcus Lee Grisham, meant little to local law enforcement at first. He wasn't in any of the original interview files. He hadn't appeared in community databases or as a listed resident of Pine Hollow at any point. To them, he was a ghost. But when they began digging, a clearer picture slowly came into view. Grisham was 39 years old at the time of Hailey's disappearance in 2008, born in rural Illinois. He had no close family ties and had lived a transient lifestyle for most of his adult life. His record wasn't violent, at least not officially, but it was unsettling. Multiple citations for trespassing, loitering, and squatting in abandoned homes stretched across state lines, from Indiana to Ohio, and eventually Michigan. He never stayed long in one place. He worked odd jobs, roofing, drywall, seasonal labor, just enough to get by. But what stood out most to detectives was where he chose to stay. Often, he was found sheltering in decaying barns, forgotten structures on the edge of farmland, just like the ones Hailey was drawn to with her camera. It was the first chilling connection. Their worlds had overlapped by chance. She sought those spaces for beauty. He, for shelter. He'd never been interviewed because no one had known he was there. He moved through Pine Hollow like fog, slow, quiet, unnoticed. In 2008, there were no rental records, no employer listed, no driver's license tied to the area. He may have been camping in the woods or living inside one of the very barns Hailey had photographed. The theory that began to take shape was stark in its simplicity. She had approached the structure he was hiding in, possibly the old collapsed shed near Old Briar Trail. She surprised him. He panicked. 15 years passed, and Grisham disappeared into the landscape again. But now, with his name in hand, investigators launched a statewide search. They combed parole records, construction rosters, and shelter check-ins. They tracked gas station surveillance footage using debit card transactions tied to jobs he had briefly worked under fake names. Eventually, they traced his last known location to a trailer lot outside of Wausau, Michigan. It was the kind of place that could be packed up in minutes. And by the time agents arrived, Grisham was already gone. The trailer sat vacant. Curtains torn, the floor layered in dust. But inside a plastic bin, detectives found something that made them stop cold. A small, zippered pouch containing a camera battery pack. Wrapped around it was a worn scarf, hand-crocheted, light blue and gray. Linda Donner had made that scarf for Hailey during her first semester of college. There was no doubt now. He had been with her. He had kept something of hers. The manhunt began in earnest. Quietly, federal agents monitored bus stations, truck stops, and employment centers. They scoured pawn shop ledgers and cheap motel registries. Grisham had lived off the grid before. He could do it again. But with his DNA now in the system, his trail was no longer invisible. The question was, how far had he gone, and how much longer would he stay one step ahead? It was a bitterly cold morning in March 2024 when U.S. Marshals located Marcus Lee Grisham at Primitive Campground Deep in the woodlands outside Bloomington, Indiana. He'd been living under the name Terry Collins, using forged documents and surviving on cash jobs doing fence repairs and tree clearing for nearby farms. The campground was little more than a cluster of canvas tents and camper vans near a state park boundary. No electricity, no running water, and far from prying eyes. When agents moved in, Grisham didn't resist. He was caught off guard but eerily calm, as if he'd known the clock was ticking. During the initial interrogation, he denied any involvement in Hailey Donner's disappearance, claimed he'd never heard the name, that he'd never been to Michigan, that the scarf found in his trailer must have been a coincidence, a mix-up, but it was the contents of his duffel bag that shattered the last of his lies. Tucked deep inside a water-damaged boot, sealed in 2 layers of cracked plastic wrap, was a memory card, dusty, bent, and badly corroded. Forensic techs spent days restoring it. And when the first images reappeared, investigators knew they had stumbled onto something chilling. The photos were fragmented, mostly shots of overgrown fields and barn structures under a thick fog. But then came the final image. Blurry, cropped too close, but unmistakably Hailey's style. In the frame, just over her shoulder, was the blurred silhouette of a second figure, tall, with a bulky coat and hunched posture. He wasn't supposed to be there. Faced with the weight of this evidence, Grisham broke. The story he told was inconsistent and fragmented, but one thing was clear. He had been inside the barn when Hailey arrived. He said she startled him, and at first, they exchanged words. She asked if it was okay to take pictures. He said yes. They even joked. He claimed she offered him some of her tea, but as she turned to leave, something in him unraveled. Whether it was fear of being reported, panic, or a darker impulse he never explained, he blocked her way. She tried to get past him. She screamed. He grabbed her. "I didn't mean to," he reportedly said in his confession. "It just happened fast." He told them he panicked, dragged her body to a nearby collapsed tool shed, one she had likely planned to photograph, and buried her beneath broken floorboards, hidden under layers of wet earth and timber. Then he left the state, changed his name, and disappeared into the American backroads. Following his instructions, detectives made their way to the site, accompanied by cadaver dogs and forensic teams. The area was overgrown, but the shed, though rotted and collapsed, was still there, beneath a section of warped wooden planks. They began to dig. The soil gave way quickly. After just 2 feet, they found what they were looking for. Human remains, largely intact, preserved by time and the damp conditions. Nearby, still zipped shut, was a canvas camera bag with Hailey's initials embroidered on the side. Inside was her lens, a few memory cards, and her handwritten shot list. 15 years of silence ended not with a scream, but with the soft crunch of a shovel hitting earth. The news shattered her family. For years, they had clung to hope, fragile, flickering, but real, that maybe she had run, that maybe she was still out there, alive somewhere, just out of reach. But now there were bones in the dirt and a confession in black ink on official record. Hailey hadn't walked away. She had simply met the wrong man in the wrong place, alone. What do you do with a truth like that? How do you hold justice in one hand and heartbreak in the other? Marcus Lee Grisham was extradited to Michigan in late April 2024 under heavy guard. By then, the story of Hailey Donner's cold case, solved after 15 years, had rippled through media outlets nationwide. But in Pine Hollow, it didn't feel like closure. It felt like the reopening of an old wound. The man accused of taking Hailey's life had returned to the very town where her absence had once haunted every street corner. At his arraignment, Grisham stood stone-faced as the charges were read aloud: second-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, and obstruction of justice. He pleaded not guilty, retracting parts of his earlier confession and offering no further statements. Still, the evidence was stacked. The DNA match, the memory card, the scarf, the camera bag, the location of her remains. All pieces of a puzzle that, at last, had come together. The courtroom was filled to capacity for the trial. Hailey's parents, Ron and Linda, sat shoulder to shoulder in the front row, their hands intertwined and unmoving. Behind them sat friends, former classmates, and even college professors who had once mentored her. Many hadn't seen each other in years. Now they were bound again not by memory but by mourning. Grisham, by contrast, remained almost spectral. He never looked at Hailey's family, never acknowledged the jury. His expression throughout the trial was unervingly vacant, cold, as if none of it belonged to him. But when the prosecution laid out the timeline, something more disturbing emerged, a pattern, not of killings, but of presence. Grisham had been seen, though not identified, lurking near abandoned properties across multiple counties for over a decade. Trespassing citations, brief arrests, and squatter reports placed him in proximity to other disappearances and assaults. None ever proven, but all suspicious. He had lived a life in the margins, drifting between places where people seldom looked, always moving, never long enough to raise alarm. His profile didn't scream monster, but that's what made him dangerous. He knew how to disappear, how to wait. Prosecutors painted a picture of a predator hiding in plain sight. Someone who didn't stalk his victims in the traditional sense, but instead occupied the spaces they wandered into. For Hailey, it had been a matter of unfortunate overlap. Her favorite barns were his favorite hiding spots. It was not premeditated murder, the prosecution admitted, But it was no accident either. He made choices. He cornered her. He silenced her. Then he buried her like an object and ran. The defense struggled to counter the weight of evidence. They leaned into a narrative of panic, claiming Grisham never intended harm and acted impulsively. But the jury remained unmoved. In the back of the courtroom, a woman Hailey once tutored in digital photography wept quietly. Another woman, who had also once hiked Old Briar Trail, sat rigid, her hands clenched into fists. The trial stirred more than memories. It raised questions no verdict could fully answer. How many other Grishams are out there? How many people disappear into silence while someone watches from the shadows? And when the verdict came, would it be enough to quiet the ache? On September 12, 2024, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned to a silent courtroom with their decision. The foreperson stood, paper trembling in hand, and delivered the words that Hailey Donner's family had waited over 15 years to hear. Guilty on all counts. Second-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, obstruction of justice. Marcus Lee Grisham sat motionless, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall behind the judge's bench. No reaction, no flicker of emotion, no apology. For those watching, it was a final act of a man who had spent his life evading connection, accountability, and humanity. The judge didn't pause long. Grisham was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison, with no possibility of parole for 35. By then, he'd be an old man if he lived that long. As the sentence was read aloud, the tension in the courtroom snapped like a rubber band pulled too tight. A quiet gasp, a hand clasped to a mouth, and then the unmistakable sound of a mother's grief cracking open. Linda Donner wept without restraint. Her husband, Ron, beside her, closed his eyes and bowed his head. "Thank you," he whispered, barely audible. Whether it was to the jury, to God, or to Hailey, no one could say for sure. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited in a tight cluster, their microphones pointed toward the family as they emerged. But it wasn't anger or outrage that defined the Donner statement. It was love. "We never stopped looking," Ron said. "We never stopped believing. Hailey deserved to come home, and now, in a way, she has." Their words were brief. There were no sweeping declarations or long explanations, just a quiet insistence that their daughter's life would not be reduced to the story of a monster, that her light would outlive the darkness that stole her away. A week later, on a crisp autumn morning, not unlike the one she disappeared on, a memorial was held in the very clearing where Hailey had been found. The collapsed shed had been cleared, the area gently restored. In its place stood a small wooden bench, engraved with her name and a quote from her journal. The forgotten places still have stories to tell. Dozens came. Some were family. Others were strangers who had followed the case from afar. A few brought flowers, lilies, daisies, wildflowers. Others brought cameras, snapping quiet, reverent photos in tribute to the girl who once found beauty in the overlooked and broken. Hailey's college classmates brought copies of her work, framing prints and hanging them on a makeshift clothesline between two trees. Her favorite photograph, a backlit barn with a crack of sunlight slicing through the boards, was pinned in the center. Ron spoke briefly. So did Linda. But it was her old professor, Dr. Marin, who said the line no one would forget. She didn't just see the world. She taught us how to see it, too. In the months that followed, her memory continued to ripple outward. An exhibit of her photography opened at the local college's art gallery. The animal shelter she volunteered at renamed their adoption center Hailey's Haven, and the scholarship fund in her name, established quietly by community donations, began accepting applications from students pursuing photography and digital arts. Hailey's story no longer ended in tragedy. It ended in movement, in light, in action. But as people walked away from the memorial that morning, one question still lingered in the breeze. How many other stories, just like Hailey's, are still waiting to be told? In the quiet months following Marcus Grisham's conviction, something began to shift in Pine Hollow. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily, like morning light creeping across a frost-covered window. It wasn't just the relief of justice served. It was something deeper, the need to honor a life that had quietly shaped the world around it. Hailey Brooke Donner had always seen things most people overlooked, and in the wake of her loss, the town began seeing too. At her community college, the art department created a scholarship in her name. It was specifically designated for young women pursuing studies in photography or digital media, especially those whose work explored nature, solitude, and forgotten places. Applicants were asked to submit a short essay describing the most beautiful thing they'd ever seen that no one else noticed. Hailey's family helped choose the first recipient. The animal shelter where she volunteered every Saturday unveiled a mural on the outer wall. It was a large-scale reproduction of one of Hailey's favorite images, a weathered red barn, its roof caved in, with a single shaft of sunlight pouring through the rafters. Below the mural, painted in small lettering, was a simple dedication. For Hailey, who saw the beauty we missed. People started noticing more. Friends walked each other to their cars at night, even in familiar places. Teachers began adding brief wellness check-ins at the start of class. Local parents taught their children how to be aware of their surroundings, not out of fear, but care. What happened to Hailey became more than a case. It became a conversation about presence, about vulnerability, about the quiet ways danger can approach when no one is looking. Inside the Donner home, change came slowly. Hailey's room remained untouched for months after the trial. Her books stayed stacked on her desk. Her dried flower bundles still hung from thumbtacks by the window. It took time, but eventually Linda and Ron knew it was time to let go, at least of the space. They packed her belongings gently, not to erase her, but to preserve her with intention. Her notebooks were stored in archival boxes. Her favorite hoodie was folded and kept in a cedar chest, and her camera, her beloved Canon DSLR, was donated to the Pine Hollow History Museum. Today, it sits in a glass display case, surrounded by 6 large prints from Hailey's final roll of film. Each image is labeled with the location and the approximate date. There's no placard describing the case, just her name and the title of the collection, The Girl Who Saw. The photos are still, quiet, but they hold something unshakable, something that lingers. Visitors don't leave quickly. They pause. They look. They begin to wonder. How many other Haileys are out there? How many quiet stories are still buried under years of fog, just waiting for someone to listen? And when the silence speaks again, will we be ready to hear it? Hailey Brooke Donner was more than a missing girl. She was an artist, a volunteer, a daughter, a friend. Her life was made of small, deliberate acts, photographing forgotten barns, comforting nervous rescue dogs, staying late to help clean up at the shelter. She moved gently through the world, but she left deep impressions in her wake. Her disappearance left a hole in Pine Hollow that never quite healed. For 15 years, her name was whispered with sorrow and mystery, her memory carried in photo prints, vigils, and quiet prayers. But silence, no matter how heavy, doesn't last forever. Thanks to a single degraded strand of DNA, the kind of evidence once considered too weak to matter, the truth finally emerged. Technology met determination. The system worked, late but not too late, and the man who had hidden for over a decade was finally pulled into the light. More important than a conviction was the restoration of Hailey's voice, not through courtroom testimony, but through the work she left behind, her photographs, her community's efforts, her family's refusal to let go. This wasn't just about justice. It was about legacy, about seeing what we too often overlook. Her story is no longer unfinished. If this case moved you, take a second to share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story deserves to be remembered.